as we finish this discussion, my wife, Tracy, who's leading worship, she said something as well that we've been thinking about even this time of year. It is hard. We are using the word joy in Christmas time, and we're talking about it as a series because in this series of Generous Life, people immediately assume we're talking about money, and we have to talk about money because of the nature of how we view generosity. But the reality is this series is about how to find joy and understanding what joy really is. And I know this from a standpoint, even people in our church, they have a hard time at Christmas time, just struggling to experience and feel joy. And generosity is one of those keys, which is why we're focusing on it this year. But we want you to know that. We know that that's a big deal. Not everybody has the memories that maybe you have, of growing up and Christmas time and family. Some people are experiencing losses and will experience losses in the future. And the reality is joy is such an important part of how to be able to know where to find joy and how to keep that joy regardless of the circumstances that are going on. And so here's the promise we made. Very, very big at first week. We said that generosity is a key to joy-filled, fully satisfied life. That when we look at what Jesus had to say, he said that it's more blessed to give than to receive. There was this aspect of blessing that really helped us understand it was a self-contained, joyful satisfaction. That it didn't have anything to do with circumstances around you, but it was deeper than happiness, right? It was deeper than just a fleeting feeling or emotion. It was a rooted sense of joy in your life coming not just from the source of all joy, but from the actions itself in terms of how you're living your life, and especially a generous life. So that's what we talked about in terms of the promise. First week, we've been dealing with assumptions for the last few weeks. First assumption is that generosity is giving. And that's a very, very hard thing to kind of disconnect. We all live in a very disconnected life that giving is generous. Financial giving is what it means to be generous. And the problem is, as we said even I think last week, that most of us don't feel rich, but we are. Right? Most of us are in the 1% in terms of wage earners in the world, and we don't feel rich, right? Because our money's tied to our emotion. And many of us feel generous, but we aren't. Because we give, because we occasionally give. We give to random things. We randomly give when there's needs and we have margin and it's just a perfect time and you feel a tug and you give, and therefore you feel generous, but the reality is you're not. Because there is a disconnect often in terms of that whole giving versus generosity about the doing and the act of giving versus the being a generous person. At the core of who you are living a generous life. And Acts 20 tells us those words that I said earlier, that we should remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that it's more blessed to give than to receive. That's that word, that markeos, Greek, that says blessed. It's a self-contained, joyful satisfaction. And everything in the tone of this verse, instead of us using it like a transaction, because we say it at Christmas time, well, it's more blessed to give than to, no, it's okay, you didn't get me anything. And the whole time you're like, I can't believe they didn't get me anything. You know what I'm trying to say? You guys with me on that? Any Christmases that you had that experience? Right? No, it's okay. No, it's more blessed to give. No, and the whole time you're like, I'll tell you, I'm not going to give them nothing next year. I'll tell you that right now. Right? And here's Jesus saying, no, you don't understand. Like this is a statement that Jesus made that Paul is reminding us about, of his words to say, look, it has to do with a life. It's a life of giving your life away. And that is where we find that joyful satisfaction versus a life of receiving, which is really that idea of success and getting and having. Because our world, our culture tells us that our joy will be found in getting, having, and succeeding. But we know that our joy, as Jesus said, will come from giving our lives away. And it doesn't have anything to do with your life in terms of your physical stuff in your life. It has to do with a life that's being transformed by Him. I can give my life away, but I'm pretty worthless without Him. Right? So I can give my life away and that's fine, but I'm selfish and greedy and gluttonous. And that's who I am, right? That's me. But if I give my life away, the life that is being transformed daily by Christ, then I'm showing, I'm living that life to the fullest of what it looks like to have the gospel affect me. And so that's where this comes in. That it's more blessed to give, to live that life centered around giving than to receive. Last week we hit a second assumption. That really this assumption that a life of generosity is crazy and unrealistic in terms of how we're talking about sort of centering everything around this idea of giving, changing the priorities. And so we contrasted kind of how we naturally think, what's natural in our culture versus what generosity looks like. This is the first graph we kind of showed you last week that talks a lot about the fact that a lot of times, and especially when it comes to money, we spend a lot of time in worry, right? So worry about future spending, worry about future circumstances, worry about future job, worry about future things. And so therefore, we often spend out, we consume. You know, it's so weird that that's our reaction to worry, is to immediately go to the mall and comfort ourselves, right? We don't have to go to the mall anymore, man. Amazon's on my phone. I can feel better instantly, right? I can feel better instantly. So this idea of worry leads us to this place, which then obviously leads us to debt. And debt and we're talking about money from a consumer standpoint, but we can be in debt all over the place. When we worry and don't spend wisely our health, then we are indebted to something that we don't want to be indebted to. The same with our opportunities, the same with our time, to live our time in such a way that we have no margin, no plan at all. Leads us to that place where we have nothing to give for the future. We have nothing to save. Saving and giving become this like afterthought that if it works out, if I get the bonus that I'm hoping for, I can save and I can give a little. Because we usually have very little or no margin, we end up back to the place where we're worrying about the future. And this is crazy. Yet, even though it is crazy to look at and acknowledge, it is so normal, right? Because everybody else is on this carousel of crazy. And everybody else is on it. So it feels normal. Again, that feeling and emotion is a lot of what drives this. And last week, one of the big things we talked about in terms of a generous life, that generous people really do know that they're already blessed. They know that they're blessed, and they think like stewards rather than owners. Now, stewards is just a fancy word for managers. And I know we don't use stewards all that often. It's kind of an older word. But stewards we know that God's blessed us, and we begin to understand that we are stewards of that blessing, and that when it comes to everything in our life, and not just owners. And we talked a lot about that last week. We'll kind of even hit on some of that more this week. But we said, look, you can't flip this around. You can't sort of make the change if you don't understand this principle that you are a steward of everything that you have, not an owner. And we said that you can't flip it around because really, instead of a crazy carousel, kind of the carousel crazy, we really want to be operating from a place of faith. And that place of faith allows us to sort of flip it upside down, and we begin to give, and we're generous first with everything, our time and our talents and our treasure and everything about it. And we save because we plan for the future. We plan for the future ability to be generous. And then we still get to enjoy our lives because God doesn't have any problem with us enjoying the life that He's given you. But we result in and we operate from, not worry, but a place of joy and a place of peace. Isn't that crazy how those two words are all Christmassy, right? We operate from a place of joy and we operate from a place of peace. Now today, we'll jump into the third assumption. And it's kind of a simple concept today, but we're going to spend a few minutes on it. This is the assumption that really my generosity, my giving, whatever you're stuck in a zone of what this means to you, that it really won't solve anything. And here's the assumption, and here's the problem with this assumption, is usually when we tie outcomes to our act of generosity, when we tie the outcome to it, it's very difficult for us to feel like it's doing anything when all we see is the big picture. All we see is all the poor. All we see is how bad health insurance is for everybody. All we see is, how awful, this situation is for all the homeless. We've stated 300 bags for Bags of Hope, and your brain goes, I can't pack 300 bags, right? I can't do it. So a lot of times we get kind of stumbling along and kind of stunted in our generosity and the being part of our generosity because we have a hard time connecting the outcome that we want to the action that we're going to do. And it just doesn't feel big enough. It doesn't feel like, I just have this this is my amount, is maybe your amount beside you is larger than my amount. But either way, the largest amount in here, even financially, is still kind of a small amount, right? It can't, in and of itself, can't solve anything. And so it kind of causes us to stumble. It kind of stunts us in our ability and in our desire to be generous. And the reality is for you and I is that we have to acknowledge that this is where we live. And again, part of it is connecting our outcomes to our actions. But I want to go back to even when we started in terms of this is an issue of who we are. and how we respond, and is probably a better way. Who we are and how we respond to the blessing that God has given us and the blessing that God is giving us daily. Now, there's two parables I want to focus on this week. One we're going to read together, and one I'm going to tell you a little bit about, and I'm going to have you read it on your own. I'm going to break out some pieces of it. Here's the passages we're reading. This is the parable of the three stewards. And maybe you've heard this a couple different versions, but Matthew 25, 14, and 30 is kind of the scripture we're going to read today. But the parable of the three stewards is very simple, and this is, like, if you don't know what a parable is, Jesus, the master teacher, he oftentimes just made up stories. Okay, he made up stories. They're not real people. They weren't real circumstances. They were stories that related. People understood them, so they kind of connected. And he would use the stories to relay principles about God's kingdom. Oftentimes, I love the fact that God somehow was able, and this is through Jesus, he was somehow able to take the complexity of God and really kind of take a little story and make it somewhat digestible, right? Somewhat simple, somewhat easy to understand. Not easy to live, not easy to fully engage in, but simple to understand and simple to grasp. And so this story is about three stewards, and it goes on to say a master or a king, whatever version you're reading, a master or a king. He gives these three stewards some gifts, and they call them talents. This is best way to describe a talent is a measurement of a gift. And so he says, look, I'm going to give you, one he gave 5 talents to. So just if you need a visual, just think a big bag of money, okay? Just big, giant, like old cartoon kind of bags of money, right? Scrooge bags, right? So he gave them 5 talents. And to the other, he gave 2. And then to the other one, he gave 1. So he kind of dispersed it, as, I think it was in there just as it was proportioned to them, to who they were. And he said, look, I'm going to give you the 5, I'm going to give you these 2, I'm going to give you this 1. And then he left. And immediately, all 3 of them kind of take it and do something with it. Now, the first 2, the one who's given 5, the one who's given 2, they sort of start using it. They start engaging with it. They start risking it. They start kind of investing in it. They start using it the way I think that the king and the master kind of intended in their life. And the one who only got 1, the problem is that he was, out of fear, decided to bury his. He decided to bury it and not use it at all, not engage it at all, not use anything that the king had given him. Now, when the king returns, the king just basically holds them an account. That's kind of the full best way to say it. They have to come and give an account for what they did with what the king gave them. And so they come, and the 5 comes up and says, hey, look, you gave me 5, and, it says it was a long while. He said, look, I have 5 more. Now, I don't know the full story of that. I don't know if he lost 2 and gained 7, and, I don't know how it all worked in his life. But I know that he said, hey, it's after this period of time, you did give me 5, but now I have 10. And one of the 2 said the same thing. Oh, there's probably a full story, long story that goes along with these things. But he had 2, and now he has 4. And so the king responds, and I want to read this response because he got great words in it. The king responds this way: you have been faithful. He says this to both of those servants. He says, you have been faithful in handling the small amount. So now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Now leave this verse up for me because I'm going to kind of hit some things. Now, I want you to notice the words. I want you to notice the words because it's a big, big piece of understanding the heart of God in this parable, since God is the king, God is the master, usually the way in which Jesus described these things. And he says this is a situation where no matter what the outcome was, this is going to be his response, because the one who got 5 more was way more profitable than the one who got 2 more, right? Just nod your head, right? The one who got 5 more was way more profitable than the one who got 2 more. But he didn't say, you have been profitable, right? You have been successful. You have, cleared your quota. You have earned your bonus, right? You have been, what's the word? Faithful. Which is a very simple phrase. It means you were responsible. You were continuously responsible. I think is the fullness of that word. You've been continuously responsible and accountable with what? The small amount I gave you. And then he goes on to say, and now I will give you many more, what's the word? Right, not reward, right? It's not a bonus. He says, now I'm going to give you more, what's the word again? Responsibilities. Now this is a big deal because this to me kind of comes down to kind of the axis by which when we begin to be generous versus doing something is we have to understand a couple things. And one is this. that generous people begin to see their blessings, right? Go to the next slide. Generous people see their blessings, see our blessings as more responsibilities. There's just more. More of what we're going to have to be accountable for. And all I'm saying is that I've been in the case like you, maybe. I have consistently been asking God for more, and I want more because I want to consume more, I want to be able to do more, and I want to be able to live in a different kind of more sense of my life. And the problem is there was a long time before I understood that when I was asking for more, what I didn't understand is I was simply asking to be responsible for more. But generous people understand that what they've been blessed with, no matter what it is, it's a small amount compared to God. It's a small amount, and they said, look, I know that when you give me even more of that small amount, I am simply getting more to be responsible for. Now that is a big deal for me, because I don't know if oftentimes we, as we ask for more, understand that more comes with a price, right? How many know this phrase? With great power comes great responsibility. How many know that statement, right? That's right, because they're all Spider-Man fans in the room. That's what I'm saying, right? Because it doesn't matter where you thought it was said. It was Uncle Pete saying it to his nephew before he even knew what was going on in his life, right? You know what I'm saying? And he made that statement. Look, with great power comes great responsibility. He didn't even understand, he didn't even know what was going on in little Peter's mind. But he stated something that was so true for us and really reflects this, that look, with the more that you are blessed with, the more you're going to be responsible for in your life. Now, you see this in the third servant. He calls him up, and the guy brings his bag. Now, his bag is probably covered in dirt because he said he buried it in a hole. So he brings him his bag and says, look, I was kind of fearful. I knew the kind of person you were, and I knew that you were going to be really mad if I lost this or whatever the case was. So I just didn't do anything with it. Here you go. Here's what you gave me back. Now, you would think at least that's a zero-sum loss, no big deal, but the king is angry. The master is angry because he did nothing with what he gave him. Absolutely nothing. I have no idea. I can't speculate whether or not in this fictitious story that he would have been okay, that if he would have, spent the one and somehow lost it, or only, lost a little bit and gained it back, but he still only had one left. I don't know what the answer would have been. I have a feeling based on the first two that had he brought anything back that he actually used, that the king would have said, you know what, it's okay. You've been faithful with the small amount I gave you. And now I'm going to give you more. Instead, he curses the steward. The steward who did nothing with what he was given. And then when Jesus always does this in parables, this is just something to know. When he asks a question in a parable, it's a question not only in the parable, but it's a question for everyone. And usually towards the end of most parables, he pulls out of the parable and makes a statement. That's true to anyone that's listening to him teach. And this is some of the statements he makes at the end. He says, to those who use well what they are given, even more will be given. And they will have an abundance. Right? Those who use well, that's the responsible word. That's the accountable word. That's the faithful word. Use well what they've been given, are going to have an abundance. And then he goes on to say this. But from those who do nothing, even with little they have, even what little they have will be taken away. Like, even those who don't have very much, they wouldn't claim to have very much to be faithful with. If they don't use it, even what little bit they have will be taken away. This is a sobering parable. Because what it tells us, and I think I made this comment a few months ago when we did a series on priorities, and it's kind of rephrased a little bit, but this is what I know to be true. That generosity, or generous people, they understand, they know that our blessings are a test. Because you are not blessed to be blessed. Just like Abraham in Genesis 12 is told by God that he's going to be the father of many nations and that he is going to be blessed. Anybody know why? So that he can bless the world. So that through Abraham and through that nation, through the people of God, you are going to bless every other nation. He wasn't being blessed because he did everything perfectly. He wasn't being blessed because it was just Abraham had so much on. If you even read the story about Abraham, you know he was such a loser as a man, right? He really was. He struggled and struggled. There were so many moments we focus on of his faith and so many moments we focus on of the blessing of God, but we don't look enough at the struggle of the man himself. And yet he looks at him and says, no, you don't understand, Abraham. You're going to be blessed. You're going to be responsible. And your blessing is a test, and you are tested daily. Everything that God's given you is a test for you as to what you're going to do with it. What will you do with it? Now, this video showed up, I'd say maybe a month or two ago on Facebook, and I already knew that we were going to, I think it was right before Thanksgiving, or right around Thanksgiving. This video showed up, and I knew I wanted to use it this third week. If you've already seen it, don't spoil it for everybody else. Just let everybody watch. It's only a couple minutes long, right? I want you to see this. It's just funny to watch this idea of just what the test looks like even in our life. Go ahead and watch this. Yeah, isn't that good? I mean, if you don't get teared up when kids cry, you're just a cold fish. That's all I got to say about that. Every time it gets me. Here's, let me just tell you personally. Let me tell you why it's real for me. Personally, I never got this for many, 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 many years of my life. Because, and you need to understand, I've been tithing since I was like given an allowance, as a kid. Because that was just what we did. And I was raised in a Christian home and a church. I've been tithing. I volunteered. I gave my time. Into our first years of marriage and into my life, we served youth groups and sang and led worship. I'm just telling you, I have served and I have given, and I failed the test consistently as to whether I was being generous versus what I was actually doing. So this is real for me because when I began to understand that I was ultimately not just responsible, but that everything that God blessed me with, and everything that I was asking him to bless me with that he didn't early on, was a test. And I mean, there's so much I've experienced, even in the last 15 years, that I didn't experience in the first 25 years, because I finally began to get this picture that I knew what it looked like to be generous versus the acts that I was involved in, the volunteering and the giving and the things. What was it like to be a generous person and to have a generous heart? And everything began to change. Just how I viewed God blessing me. And we've gone ups and downs, our roller coasters, in terms of whether it's financial or time or whatever. It's been up and down. It doesn't change the circumstances of anybody's life. It changes just how we view it and how we respond in our lives. And so, even before we read this next parable, I want you to understand this. It was a big deal for me because it had to happen. Many, many things had to happen before God would even give me an opportunity to be tested with more blessing. Now, another parable that Jesus gives is, just kind of brings this point home for me, and I'll kind of make this a little bit quicker, but this is the whole parable. He said he told him this parable that the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest, right? And he thought to himself, what shall I do, right? Action. What should I do, right? I have no place to store my crops. So like he got so much, he was blessed so much, like I don't have a place to store it. And he goes on to say, well, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus, right? I'll store my surplus grain. And this is just, you can tell this is an attitude. This is a being. His response and what he was going to do was very similar to what we would do, right? We've been blessed and we've been blessed and we've been blessed. And, now we need to refinish the basement and buy the third car and get the vacation home and, do the things that maybe we've had on our list to make sure we can accomplish or at least experience in life. He said, look, this is what this looks like when this man was blessed. And he goes on to say, and I'll say to myself, I have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. I guess that's retirement back then in that world, right? I guess that's for the rich man. That was what he was thinking. But God said to him, you fool. Now, I want you to be clear. He didn't say you fool because this rich guy was foolish because of money. He says, this very night, your life will be demanded from you. And then he asks the question. This is a question that goes to everybody. He says, then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? See, there was this understanding in his heart that, well, it came to me, so it's for me. This was a blessing to me, therefore it's for me. What am I going to do with it? Well, I'll tear down the roof. And he began to think, well, I guess, I I guess I can build bigger barns and I can enjoy this for the rest of my life. The problem is he just didn't know he didn't have any life left. He didn't know, as we all don't know. He didn't know he didn't have any life left. He thought the surplus, he thought the wealth, he thought the bonus, the blessing itself was guaranteeing him a life to experience it. Because if it came to him, it must be for him. And he goes on to say, and this is where he pulls back and makes that statement to everyone who's listening. Look, this is how it will be. This is how it will be when whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich towards God. This is how it will be when you continually fail the test. It will be total loss, right? Because now who's going to get your stuff? Who's going to get everything that you thought was for you? Well, somebody else was going to get it, right? But not because he had a generous heart, but because his heart wasn't working anymore, right? Who's going to get it? Who's going to get all this that you thought was for you? It goes back to what we said last week, if in terms of ownership versus stewardship. If it can be taken away, right? If it can be taken away, then you don't own it, right? So why would you miss the opportunity to give it away? Why would you take for granted, as you continually fail this test, why would you take for granted what you've been blessed with? Your time, your talent, your gift and passion, your stuff, your resources. Why in the world would you continue to assume that it's for you? Not just because it's a better life, but because we are going to be held accountable for it. We are responsible for it. And if you're anything like me, listen, I'm just telling you, I pray for more. I'm a big more person. I think more is more. Some people say less is more, and I think, well, that's awesome. Just think how much more would be, right? If less is more, just think how much more would actually be. And I'm always asking God for more. And the reality is that, again, not that long ago, maybe 10 plus years ago, that kind of changed. The more I'm asking for is more responsibility. More tests to see if I'm going to be faithful with the next blessing, if I was faithful with the first blessing. Now, this is the principle, that more doesn't make you generous, right? Generosity has to begin before more. And that's what that parable brings out. Look, he didn't all of a sudden become generous because he got this huge amount of, he had a surplus of there. I mean, he didn't even need it. It was so much more than he could possibly ever need. And that didn't make him generous. He did the same thing he had always done. And I can say the same thing about me as I can probably say about you. If God were to land the blessing in your lap that you've been praying for, I can guarantee you would do what you have always done. And if you've always consumed it, and you've always been filled with fear, and you've always worried, and you've been filled with debt and no margin in your life, that it doesn't matter how much he blesses you, you will continue to do what you've always done, assuming that it's for you. Not understanding the responsibility that blessing really brings about us. Okay, now this is a big deal for me because as we read last week and as we've been talking about all series, we believe generosity is a money issue when we keep telling you, no, Jesus made it very clear, it is a heart issue. This is in Matthew 6. When he says, wherever your treasure is, the desires of your heart will be also. Not only is it something that reveals it to you, not only where you pour your time and pour your treasures and pour the things of value into your life, does that reflect where your heart is, it is also a rudder. You guys know, anybody say, I don't want to lose anybody, right? Rudders, right? Yeah, it's a rudder. Means that if you would like your heart to be somewhere else, start putting your treasure into it. Start putting your value towards it. Start investing that in that way. Start spending more time in that area. Start praying more for your top 5. Start this instead of this. And I promise you, it is a rudder. It will eventually move your heart there. And that's a big deal for me because people ask me all the time, well, Matt, this is a conversation, this is a question I got, the first week. Well, what do I give to? How do I give? What do when it comes to time and everything, money and everything, how do I give? What do I give towards? And this is a very, very simplistic way to do it. And this is a lot of, I've agreed wholeheartedly. I think I told you last week about a book that I love called Fields of Gold. A lot of principles come from this. But this also comes from this book, Fields of Gold. And it's just a very simple filter. Two words, two phrases. The two phrases are this. All right? What are you grateful for? And what are you broken over? That's it. What are you grateful for? What are you broken over? Use those two filters and see what God tells you. What are you grateful for? Well, put some value into those things. Time, energy, your gifts, passions. Maybe that's where you've been missing the boat in terms of you're kind of connecting what you do in terms of your volunteering. Put it into the areas that you're grateful for. Or put it in the areas that you're broken over. You know, if Raynell, West Virginia is less than 200 miles away. It's right around the corner. They're going to spend 2 years rebuilding homes there. 2 years. And maybe you can give, to be a part of the offering we're going to do. Maybe you need to go, because the place we serve in West Virginia, the Guyan Valley Center, they're closing the center for the winter just to send all their resources to the one center that's right outside right now. That to me is where you go, okay, what am I broken over? What am I grateful for? One of the funniest things I tell people sometimes is, look, we have so many generous people at our church. We have people that give occasionally, and that's great. And, God takes care of the needs of the church. That's fine. But I love it when I get letters and I get checks from parents. You don't even know if it's one of your parents. I wouldn't tell you either. From parents of people who know that their kids came to Journey, they found Journey, they love Journey, they're so happy to be at Journey, and I get checks and letters from parents that write me and don't even know who have any idea who I am and say, we're just so thankful our kids found a church home. We're so thankful that our kids found a church that teaches about Jesus Christ. We're so thankful. And a check comes along with it. We're so grateful for Journey Church. They've never been yet. I try to write them back, tell them, well, come visit us, come see us. What are you grateful for? What are you broken over? Just a simple thing. When it comes to, that idea of not storing up treasures here, but being rich towards God, what does that mean? I love the way Paul expands it when he writes Timothy. He says this. He says, teach those that are rich, and this is all of us, right, in this world, not to be proud or to trust in their money, which is so unreliable, right? Their trust should be in God who richly gives, who richly provides us all we need for our enjoyment. Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works. They should be generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. And by doing this, they will be storing up their treasure as a good foundation for the future, so they may experience true life. Now, I want you to just stop here and let you hear this. As a church, this is why we make it a very big deal in terms of being versus doing. There is absolutely nothing you can do to make God love you any more than He already loves you. Okay? There is absolutely nothing to do with your actions. You cannot earn the grace. You cannot, you cannot maintain the mercy of God in your life. You cannot do it. It's all had to be done for you. That's why we do Easter. That's why we talk about Christmas. That's why Christ came for the world. That's why He loves you and He is your Savior. There's nothing you can do. Don't even try. Anything we're talking about in terms of action never has anything to do with your salvation, with your eternal security, with your ability to be loved by God and to be one of His kids. It has nothing to do with that. But yet, Jesus still teaches and preaches, and Jesus still teaches all the time, and so did Paul reflect that there is a way to engage in the life that Jesus said you can have. Jesus said, I came to bring you life and life more abundant. And every time He says you should do this and not that, every time He says, pay attention to this and not that, is simply a way that you and I can engage it. Okay, we can be saved, we can be loved, we can be cared for, we can be doing all this, but we can also view our life as owners and spend our entire life seeking, having, getting, and receiving. And then we'll go to heaven. And God will look at us and say, what did you do with what I gave you? What did you do with your life that I blessed you with? And you'll be accountable. And it won't have anything to do with whether or not He loves you. And here we are talking about how to find joy, how to have that absolute lasting joy in your life. And you go over here and say, well, I want to spend a little bit of my life trying to figure out how to get myself centered around giving my life away. I want to take a step towards generosity. I want to begin to feel what it looks like to have a joy. Little glimpses of it happen at Christmas time because it's a season of giving. And so we get little tastes of it. We get little, but it doesn't last. It doesn't last. So we have to take a step there. We have to take a step towards a generous heart. Now, I've told you this before. I can't I can't make you have a generous heart. I can't change who you are. I don't even preach that stuff. That's all the Holy Spirit. I trust him implicitly to do the work in you that he needs to do in you as I trust him to do the work in me. Okay? I can't make you be generous. I can help you take steps towards something that I hope and pray would sort of give you a little taste of what you could have more of if you would just take some steps and let God lead you there. So here's what we're going to do today. All right? Now, I told you this a couple weeks ago that we were not greasing you up for a big offering, right? We weren't greasing you up for it. We've made it very clear what our end-of-year goals and all that are. It's fine. What we're going to do today is, we've only done it one other time before, and this is just to help you take a step towards generosity. So when you leave today, you're going to get an envelope, okay? You're going to get an envelope, and that envelope is going to have a couple of these cards in them. It says Hope Lake Norman on the front. It says, this is a gift of hope from Journey Church. Now, you don't have to use these. We give these out periodically, just help people. Anytime they're doing kind of random acts of giving, we can say, this is a good idea. Give people, if you don't want to, if you want to pay for somebody's bill and do something, that's fine. But we basically said, look, this as a church, as a group of people, we want you to take a step. This is our heartbeat. We're going to give you, total today between us and Denver, we're going to give out over, I think it was $4,500. Just give it to you. Now, I want you to understand something. That is not because we have $4,500. I mean, we physically do because it's here. But it's not because, I mean, right now we're probably not even halfway to our 175 giving goal. As a church, it's one of the first few years we've looked at, we're probably going to come in under budget rather than over budget. And I want you to understand, that's fine. It doesn't change the fact that we felt God say, no, we need to do this today. We need to do it. Instead of asking you for something, we're going to give you something. And we're going to give you the challenge. And I would pray that you would just, for a moment, you're going to be at both sides. They're going to be both sides of the doors. I'm praying that you just for a moment, you're going to take the envelope. You're going to take the envelope, and I want you to understand what you're responsible for. You're responsible to use this to bring hope to somebody's life. I want you to pray over it. I want you to give your card away if you can. And I want you to use it. Doesn't matter. There's $5 in there. They go all the way up to, I think there's $100 in there. Doesn't matter what you're given. I believe God has that in store for you already. You're going to take it. You're going to take the challenge. You're going to say, I'm responsible for this. And just for a moment, I want you to picture that everything in this envelope, it might be $5, it might be $100, or anything in between. I want you to understand that this is what your life looks like to God. That he has given you everything that you have. And you are responsible to use it. So why not? Why not move to a place to live a life of generosity? To live a generous life. And see if you can't experience the joy that is beyond circumstances, that's self-contained, that's fully satisfying, where you won't live in a state of discontent anymore. Now, the way I've told the guys, they're going to block the doors almost, okay? So don't try to sneak out. They're going to give you an envelope. If you don't want to take the challenge, it's fine. Tear open the envelope, put the money back in one of the tall boxes, give it back to the church, that's fine. If you don't want to take the challenge, don't. But I'm hoping that all of you will take that challenge towards generosity. And know as a church, that is our goal. That is our heartbeat for you. And I can't wait to hear the stories. A couple years ago we did it, and the stories were just overwhelming as what people were able to do. They even took their own money and matched it and just continued to press into that aspect of God. Help me see this financial understanding in the rest of my life. That I want to begin to live a life that's generous. That comes from a generous heart. And not just randomly and occasionally do the actions that look that way. Let me pray for us this morning. Heavenly Father, I'm so thankful. Thankful for the folks here, the folks in Denver, and just the way in which you challenge us with your word. God, I wish there was an easier way to state the fact that we are accountable and responsible for what you've given us. God, you know my heart. I have looked for loopholes in the first early years of my life, my entire life. I have looked for the loopholes. And God, there's just none. And even though it doesn't change how much you love me, and it doesn't change, your grace and mercy for me, it is a way in which I have experienced some of the greatest joy that you've ever given me and my wife and my kids, is to help me understand a heart of generosity and to move to a place to give my life away. God, I pray that for every person here in Denver listening later on, that you would help all of us engage in this challenge. In your name we pray. Amen.